Hi, my name is Jazz Rabadia, and you're here at Shree Swaminarayan Mandir, Kingsbury, the world's first eco-temple by design. The temple was built in 2014, and it was through hundreds of hours of volunteering that it was built in this magnificent way. We're really a centre for the entire community to get involved. Ultimately, we want people to improve their physical, their mental, and their spiritual well-being. So there are many different areas that form Sri Mukta Swami Bapa complex. One is the mandir itself. We also have a multifunction hall and some office spaces. And the entire grounds welcome a whole host of the community. So on a typical day, we could have over 700 in our congregation, but over massive festivals such as Diwali and New Year, that can rise to well over 10,000.
I am Beth Cara, and I'm part of the audio-video team here at Shree Swaminarayan Mandir, Kingsbury. During the weekdays, we have 20 to 50 people, our morning and evening congregation, whereas on the weekend, it can go up to 1,000. Making sure that the system is diverse enough and intelligent enough to actually cater for both one person speaking during the weekday to a small orchestra on the weekend performing. The challenge was that this was all to be done in fitting with the deco that we are going to have in the new temple, and making sure that we have equal sound throughout. Throughout the weekdays, it's an unmanned system. It's configured in such a way that we would zone it off where the balcony, the top gallery zone would be off, and everything's set on timers. Because it's a small congregation, there's no need of actually powering up all the amplifiers, powering up much of the system, whereas when it's the weekend, the whole system would come on. One thing that we found that was very helpful was the beam steer technology. We were able to remap the pattern and actually make sure that we don't hit the area where the orchestra was based. And that gave us the ability to project clear sound around the orchestra and not have SPL levels which were too high that a conversation between two people could not be heard. After installing at our new temple, we've actually had positive comments from our congregation, but externals as well, that the sound is not overpowering. At the same time, it's very clear. In terms of coverage, we're covering the whole temple equally. And that is something that we've never historically had.
My name's Chris Austin. I'm the Technical Sales Manager at Autograph. We do sound, sales, installations, and rental. We're very well known for our theatre shows in the West End and around the UK on tour, but we also do a lot of installations in houses of worship, education, and AV integration. So the requirements of the temple were quite contradictory as usual, because on the one hand, we knew it had to hit quite high SPL levels because of the musical worship and the types of activities it was doing. But on the other hand, once the design for the new temple was underway, we spoke to the committee that was designing it, and they were very keen to have something that was visually unobtrusive because of the very high standard of aesthetic that was going for. It's a very beautiful building. They didn't want speakers hanging off pillars and big ugly black boxes everywhere. So that shaped the specification of the system quite early on, because we had to get as much power as we could, but do so in a way that was very discreet. I put a lot of emphasis in trying to make it sound like the sound is coming out of the person that's speaking. The difficulty of doing that in a very large open room is you can't always get the speakers where you want to. The other challenge in buildings like this is they're typically very reverberant because they've got a very high domed ceiling, often lots of reflective materials. So very early on in the process, we were able to work with the team designing the temple to get the reverberation time in the room as low as possible. So they worked throughout the build to a target of an RT60 of 1 second, which they ultimately hit, which made our life a lot easier when it came to actually getting the controlled coverage we needed. We picked the Tannoy QFLEX as the main part of the system because it allowed us to get the speakers much higher on the wall than we otherwise would. So by using a steerable column, We can put the sound exactly where we need it while keeping it out of the domed ceiling, which helps keep the sound very clear. But also, by using that steering, we can put the speakers higher up than we'd normally be able to, and then use the beam steering to get the sound back down to the floor. The Tannoy QFLEX in particular, compared to a lot of the other steerable columns, is very musical. So we went through a process of auditioning different speakers with the AV team at the temple in their old temple, the QFLEX being one of them, and everyone was delighted with how it sounded for its size, how high we could get it, how much control we had over where it could go, because it's important that the system here not only did speech very well, but could also reproduce pleasant music to quite a high SPL. In addition to the QFLEX, we've installed 2 pairs of VLS 15s, which also have the benefit of being very slim, so they're very unobtrusive, they're slightly curved, so they look really nice, and when painted in, they blend in really nicely with the details on the pillars. So we use a pair of those just to bring a bit more punch further back in the room for the really loud bits, and we use a pair up on the balcony because the balcony is protected by a glass balustrade to stop people falling off, but when you're sat on the floor, you can't hear the QFLEX. So there's a pair of VLS 15s on the balcony just to provide sound for the people sat upstairs. The balconies aren't too deep, but because the speakers are so high, we needed fill coverage underneath. I was very keen that the fill coverage that went in was time aligned properly to the front of the room so that we got that natural sound. So we chose to use ceiling speakers rather than surface mount speakers, which might be a more natural choice, because we wanted a completely flush look. The trick to making the ceiling speakers work as delays was putting them each on their own amplified line. That meant we could also run them at low impedance. So we've got CMS 503s under the balcony and CMS 503s in the ceiling above the balconies, which go around the sides of the temple. So they're then time aligned back to the room and used just to provide a very subtle reinforcement, which, unless you were looking for them, you wouldn't know were there. We've put in Lab.gruppen E-Series to provide very energy efficient loudspeaker channels, because each channel is quite low powered, there's just a lot of them, so it doesn't make sense to have very big amplifiers. Energy efficiency is an important part of the temple build overall, so that was quite an easy, natural fit to go for the E-Series amplifiers with their Energy Star compliance. The main temple itself is a particular highlight for me because it does sound so natural, because the attention to the acoustics made by the design team was such. It's a very pleasant room, a very pleasant sounding room anyway. And then with the gentle reinforcement we've put in, it means when it's being used for vocal reinforcement, it's really very natural. There's no perception that you're listening to a large PA or a PA made up of so many components. And yet, when it needs to produce music, it can all be dialed up. And it does that very well too. Autograph have worked with Lab.gruppen for a very long time. Indeed, we used to be their distributor. We've also worked with Tannoy for a very long time because they've always been a great manufacturer of great speakers. So when the two became combined, we were quite excited because that seemed like a great partnership.